Welcome to Master Gardening. I'm your host, Bud Qualk, and we talk all the time about this is going to be a special show or that's going to be a special show. Tonight is going to be a special show. We're at the Purple Toad Winery in Paducah, Kentucky on Old 45, and the owner, Allie Dossie, is going to take us on a tour. And this is Alan Dossie. You all know who he is. And I got one question for you.
Sure.
What percentage of the wine sold in Kentucky is Purple Toad?
50%.
How many wineries are in Kentucky?
74 wineries.
And he got 50% of this business.
So
It's all yours, Alan.
thank you. Well, welcome everybody. I appreciate you coming in today. We're going to go through a couple of things. We'll go through a little of the about the winery itself. We'll start on some growing techniques, things that I've learned over time, and then we'll get into the winemaking. And then our very last item, we will actually run the machine, let y'all see us doing a little bottling while you're here. Well, I'll give you a little background on Purple Toad. We started, I was an insurance salesman here. I was president of Western Rivers Insurance. And I went to Napa 24 years ago and just loved it. I decided to start growing grapes. So I came back home after going to the Napa visit and did my homework. I had a stack of papers about this high, just learning how to grow grapes, the best land, how you had to treat them, the pH, all the fun stuff we do. So this is kind of how this got started. We're 14 and a half years old. We currently are top 300 largest in the U.S. Volume-wise. In 2020, we produced and sold 1 million bottles. So that was a big deal for us. Yeah. Everybody liked it that year. Yeah. But give you a little idea, I was in Napa 2 weeks ago. Hadn't been back for about 10 years. I like to go every so often. But 24 years ago, I met this guy, Mike Gergich. He was at one of the wineries. I don't know if you've heard of the Taste of Paris in 1976. Used to, wines in California were considered cheap or jug wines. They compete against the French wines, and they took a $5 Chardonnay and made it a $75 to $125 Chardonnay because they beat the French against the very best the French had. The guy that made the Chardonnay, I met him 24 years ago. Had no idea who this gentleman was. He was the owner and the head winemaker of Gergich Hills. His name's Mike Gergich, but he actually made the Chardonnay. He's 99 years old. He still comes in the winery occasionally. This is one of his Chardonnays he made. This one's 12 years old, which is unusual. Usually Chardonnays are drank at an earlier age, but the way he makes it with almost no air, that they'll keep much longer. And this is a signed bottle, so this is one that I keep. Aww. And this was signed by Mike. Also, his daughter owns the winery now, so I've got a signed bottle from her also. So we met with her the other day and spent about half an hour. We were talking about her dad, so that was a special time for us. A lot of people ask us how we got the name Purple Toad. When you start going through the names, you got to have something original. Around 80% of the wines either purchased or consumed by women, so you want to cater to that market. You go through the names that are taken. There's 11,000 plus wineries in the United States, and you start thinking of the names and they're taken. You go on the internet, you look, and they're taken. So it ended up being, if you press the grapes the old way with your feet, which is how they used to do it, then your toes are purple. So we did a little play on words. And we took a Costa Rican red-eyed tree frog, and if you look at him, he has purple toes. So that's kind of how our namesake started. So I was the original founder of the company with my ex-wife now, but I did all the winemaking, I did the growing, I helped, of course, with the harvest and everything like that. Now I have my son here. He's in Myrtle Beach today. So he's not here. Usually I let him do half of this, so we kind of split this up. Yeah, he's got 2 little munchkins, so he's the future. So this will be his and the kids. I've got three children, and at some point in time, I'll step to the side, and this will be theirs. So this is our perpetuation plan for them. So something to pass on. That was one of the biggest things that I really enjoyed was most of your kids leave, and they don't come back. And when he was a junior, we all were Western Kentucky University graduates, and he decided as a junior that he was going to come back and do this. So that was a good day for us. So what we do now, I'll start a little with the planting. Kentucky used to be one of the top grape and wine producers in the United States before Prohibition. We were number 2 or number 3, depending on which state's fighting over who it is this time. Now, of course, California's number 1, Washington's number 2, New York's number 3, and Oregon's number 4 in grape production. We're around in the 25 to 30 range for grape production. But the main thing in planting, one of the first things is land selection. You have to, in commercial land, you need to choose the land for the vines, not choose the vines for the land. So there's a few little things you need to learn. One of the main things is frost is our enemy in this part of the country. We have fungus from water, wet fungus, and then California has dry fungus. So we have 2 different things, 2 different issues that you have to fight. Number 1 thing you want to do is north-facing land if possible. That will delay your bud break, and that way you escape some of the frost issues. Usually our vines come out around the 1st of April. So you're trying to miss the frost. And mostly what I grew most of the French vines, which are very susceptible to frost, to diseases. They're more difficult to grow, but they make a little different flavor, so that's what you're working for. They have 2 main buds. If frost hits the first bud, you lose 70% of your crop, and if it hits the second bud, you lose 100% of your crop. You still get to spray them, water them, train them, and everything else, but you still may not get fruit. Now, several of the American varieties will actually come back and put on additional fruit. So it just depends on what you're trying to do and what your final use is. Grapes in general are the same as your grass. Your pH is 6.5, so that's what you're looking for. Most of the soil here is 5.2. So you usually have to lime the soils. So one of the first things you do once you select where you're going to put it is get a pH test or have your soil test for fertilizer and all the other stuff. So that's one of the most important things. But almost every vine here or crop, you need to add lime for your pH. The trick on the pH is you can put fertilizer down, you can put all your different things in, but if the pH is off, your plant cannot take the nutrients from the ground up the plant. So even if it's sitting there, if the pH is off, it won't be able to get up into the plant. One of the main things on grapes is well drained. So bottomland is not good, wetland is not good, so you need drainage. If you see all the vines in Europe and stuff, they're almost always on hills or mountains, and you don't want near the bottom because of frost. So you're always trying to good drainage. They do not like wet feet. We grew mostly the French vines, the Chardonnays, the Cabernet Sauvignons, the Merlots, which they required rootstock. In the 1880s, the French, we started to beat them in wine production and in grape production. And so they started importing our American vines. Well, there was a little disease with our vines, phylloxera. Our plants were resistant to it, and those high-dollar Merlots and Cabernets were not. So they offered $1 million in the 1880s for someone to come up with a solution, and they tried these hybrids. So if you'll look at a lot of what people grow here, it's Chardonnays and things like that, which is an offshoot of Chardonnay. But what they did is they would put American rootstock on the bottom, and then the top part of the plant would be, the Merlot or Chardonnay. So that's how they end up. So you'll see a graft about 4 inches above the ground. So that's one of the things they did to solve the issue. Because They liked the flavor of their vines, but they needed the vigor from the American rootstock, so it's a little fixed. There's several ways. The trellising system varies by your type of grape. So really what you're trying to do is what purpose are you going to use the grapes for? So are you wanting them to eat, table grapes? Are you wanting to make wine out of them? Or you want to make juice and jellies? So the vine selection is based on that, and you can go through a lot of these different things and figure out what you're looking for. The French vines like I had, they grow upright. Most of the American vines will grow up and then umbrella off. So your trellis is different for both. So like in the French vines, they'll come up and tee off like this at 3 feet. And you'll have a bud every 6 inches. The American vines, you want them to grow up this way. You'll see the Concords most people have in their backyards and think, you grow the trellis to here, you'll grow out, you may grow out 8 or 10 feet, and then you'll prune them back each year to about this length, and they'll umbrella off. So your trellising, your pruning, all of that's just based on what type of vine you plan on growing. So after you get them planted, we usually had to water them 3 times a week, 4 times a week. Most of the grapes in this part of the country, you only water the first 2 years. After that, their roots and stuff will be able to handle and get enough water completely. Now this year's a little different. We essentially didn't have any rain almost a whole year, so you needed to supplement a little, but you still don't want to water them too much. One of the main things on wine grapes is you have wine grapes you want real small. The reason is most of your flavor in a grape comes in the skin. So the smaller the grape, the more intense the flavor. So the skin ratio to pulp ratio is what you're looking for. So if you look at the California grapes or our wine grapes, smaller, more intense the flavor. And if you're eating grapes or table grapes, you want the bigger, buffier grapes. So one of the things you'll look at in decision making for harvesting and things like that is if there's a rain coming. So if there's a rain coming, they're like sponges. And so if you're going to get a ½ inch or an inch of rain, then that's going to water down your grapes. So everyone has made Kool-Aid. And if you put a little too much water in your Kool-Aid, you lose flavor. Our wine grapes are the same way. And that's one of the big benefits California has. It essentially doesn't rain. From April to October in Napa Valley area, they essentially get 0 rain. So they can control the grape size. So that's one of the reasons that their land there is so expensive. To give you an idea, before the fires, it was getting to where a Napa Valley acre of land would be $1 million for 1 acre. A lot of people are getting tired of the fires and the heat and all the water issues. And now you can buy some of the Napa Valley land for about $350,000 an acre. So that gives you an idea. It's still super expensive. But that, yeah.
Water, is it a drip system, or can you water overhead, or how do you?
You can do both. You can do the drip. Usually it rains enough here, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
That's the trick in Kentucky. Normally, rain's our enemy. We get too much rain. That's our issue. Like I said, out there they get dry fungus, they get powder mildew. Here we get downy mildew is our main thing. If you look at pictures of the old vines in a lot of places, you'll see rose bushes at the end of the row. There's a reason is that those rose bushes will show the disease before the grape plants was. And the rose bushes and the grapes have similar chemicals they use. So that's what those roses are at the end for, is that's a quick tell for them. Hey, I've got powder mildew or downy mildew coming in, and I need to increase my spray schedule. So, in general in Kentucky, a few of the grapes you can do limited sprays, but in general you're going to have to spray the grapes 10 to every 14 days. That's usually the schedule. We have black rot, we have downy mildew, we have a couple other diseases, but the main thing when you're doing a spray is everybody's had antibiotics at your doctor. Well, you can't use the same chemical base more than 2 times in a row. So you must switch and rotate to one that's not related to the one you're using. So you have, like we use Menkazeb, and then there's Meneb, and then there's 2 or 3 other, and they're all the same. So you have to check them, and you have to rotate those and make sure. And that one has a re-entry period. It has to be so many days before harvest. So if you'll look to the Midwest Small Fruit Guide, which these guys, I used to get one every year from them, it will update you, but that one can only be used, and I think the number is 65 days prior to harvest. So there's certain harvest entry dates prior to harvest. There's 2 types of sprays in general. There's ones that's surface spray, and then you have a systemic spray. Systemic is absorbed into the plant and will not wash off. The other one will wash off with rain. So if you get a 1/2 inch of rain one day, then you're more than likely going to have to spray in 2 or 3 days at the most. If you get 1 inch of rain with one of those that's a surface spray, you're going to have to spray immediately as it quits raining. So all that's, the systemics will actually watch the weather, and they're of course more expensive, and you'll come in and you'll spray that one before a day or 2 before a rain. And that way it's absorbed in the plant and it goes through the rain without an issue. So there's all kinds of little tricks you learn. In our grapes in general, we go through and we hedge them. So we actually take a hedger you use in your front yard and go through and shape the vines. So what you're trying to do is keep the leaves down to a certain amount. We have a wet fungus issue, so you actually go through and leaf thin around the fruit. So your staff will go through, or us, will go through and pull the leaves around and allows airflow. So if you look at Napa Valley or some of these, you'll see all the fruit hanging down below, and there's not any leaves next to it. That's why they do it. They're allowing the air to come through and keep the fruit dry, and so it doesn't mold or get some of the other diseases. So there's a lot of hands-on work for this, so it takes a while. To give you a little idea, a normal grapes, American grapes, Concord, things of that nature, you'll get usually 7 to 8 ton per acre. On the French vines like I had, the Cabernets, the Chardonnays, you'll get maybe 3 ton per acre. So there's a big difference in fruit quantity you get. We'll go through your growing seasons usually April 1st, and then usually you'll start harvesting depending on the variety. Some are sooner than others. Some of them can be mid-August, and then you can go all the way up to October the 15th. So it depends on which variety you bring in and all the different stuff. So these are all decisions you have to make on what you're trying to do. We've had the vines, if you notice out front, we had pulled some of them up. They were 24 years old. Most grapes in general have a lifespan of between 15 and 25 years. So ours were getting near the stage. They were getting very aged. The growth was slowed drastically. You'll find a few vines in the Napa area. Old vines usually can be 60, 70, but they have very low production. So you have to keep the vigor up on these. In February, we usually prune. Pruning, we essentially cut off 50% of the vine. So it depends on the type of vine you use, but in general, 50% of your vine is going to be cut. So we cut it almost down to nothing. So like on ours, if you got a cordon, you'll leave a little 2 buds usually on the top on this cordon. And then on the American varieties, they'll come from about this high down. You'll leave a stem about this long and have 6 on it, but you'll have a gap between them like this. That's how you prune. The reason you have to prune, if you just let it grow, the plant does not have enough energy to ripen the fruit. So if you see a lot of people have fruit that they say, oh, it doesn't get ripened, or it turns black, black rot, and just turns in dried up, then in many cases, you've got too much fruit on the vine. It does not have enough energy to ripen the fruit fully. So that's another thing you have to look at. Some varieties produce too much fruit, and you have to automatically go in and cut the fruit off. So lots of work on this. Like this year, we just planted Marquette. It's American variety. It's less susceptible to many of the diseases. It's going to be a little easier to control. It's still an upright grower, but this year we had to water, every 3 days or so because of the drought. So that's another issue. We go through and we actually go in hand pick, and we'll bring the fruit in. Most of the picking is done early in the morning. We usually try to get out there at 5. When I was in Napa 2 weeks ago, they usually started at 1 or 2 in the morning. They want the fruit cool, because as soon as you pick the fruit, it starts degrading. So they try to pick it as cool as possible, and they'll take it into a chiller room, and they'll try to drop the fruit down to around 45, 50 degrees if they can. So that's one of the, preserve the flavor and what they're really looking for. In general, what we do, we'll jump over, that's the basics on the growing. There's a lot of things in between there, but we start with the winemaking. We'll harvest. We'll do it really early in the morning. We'll go out there with pruning shears is what we do. We've only had 1 year where somebody hadn't cut their finger. So somebody always clips the end of the finger for some reason. And so they always got Band-Aids online. But we'll clip the fruit. We'll clip the bunch of them together. We're bringing it up here. We've got a crusher destemmer. It's a machine about the size of this table. You dump them in them, and it's got paddles in it. And what it does, it separates the grapes off of the stem. It'll kick the stem out the end, and then we'll take the grapes. They'll go out and be pumped into a holding tank, and then we'll set them in that holding tank. If it's a white wine, everybody's had an apple, and if you leave an apple out, it browns. So the white wines have to be crushed and destemmed, and immediately go to a tank, and immediately have a lid on that tank, and then you put SO2 or sulfur in them. That's our natural preservative. So the red wines, actually, the red pigment in it saves them. So we actually ferment them in an open tank. The white wines will be fermented around 55 degrees, a little cooler. The red wines around 62, 65 degrees. In general, what you do, you're looking for sugar content, and everybody buys grapes in the grocery. They are around 15 bricks, which is our industry standard. It's percentage of sugar in a liter. So when we pick wine grapes, we want them at 22 bricks. So they're 50% sweeter than what you're getting at the grocery, and they're delicious. The only issue with ours, they do have seeds. All these are not. I was in Napa 2 weeks ago, and they've had a drought. They're not running there. They were at 32 bricks. So they're going to have to actually add water to their grapes, which we're not allowed to do in Kentucky. In California, they can add water. We can add sugar. So they have trouble over ripening, and we have trouble with not ripening enough. So you're fighting the two. So when you harvest, there's several things you're looking at. And everybody goes out and picks their grapes off their vines. But we're looking for the pH, how acidic they are. Everybody's had a Coke, you let it sit out and come back a half an hour and it's flat. Well, if you don't have enough acid, that's what your grapes will do. And that's what our wine will do. So the pH is important. The maturity of the grape is important. If you pick them too early, ours will taste like peppers. They have a pepper taste or different things, little off taste. So you're also looking for sugar content. One of the biggest things that the other winemakers do is they base their picking on sugar. Well, you never use sugar as your determining factor. It's always your pH, your tartness, your acids that you have in them, and the maturity of grape. That's what you're looking for. Sugar you can supplement. but you can't supplement those things very well. So we bring in general, white wines are more tart, Chardonnays, things of that nature, and you're around 3.2, 3.4 pH. And your red wines, they're going to be around 3.5, 3.6, so they're less tart. So that's kind of the pH you're starting in. But we'll get them in the tanks. We'll add yeast to them. Yeast is a living organism. You have to treat it as such. You actually feed the yeast. So you actually put nitrogen in, which is its food. It likes the nitrogen. And you'll put in some other yeast products in there that helps it grow. We try, everybody has cooked potatoes, green beans in your pot. And we have glycol systems on our big tanks back here, which is air conditioning units. So it's liquid air conditioner. Well, if you ever overcook something, got it too hot, it loses flavor. Wine's the same way. So we'll ferment the whites at 55 and the reds at 62. But if you just leave the yeast in by itself, it will generate up to 30 degrees increase. And you wouldn't, I just never would have thought you get a 30-degree increase. So it'll be 90-some degrees, 95 degrees. When you do that, you're losing flavor. And then you get some off flavors, which we're trying to avoid. But we go through this. The process in general takes, if you got a glycol system, then you can ferment because the yeast is happy. It's got a great temperature. It's got its yeast food with it. You can ferment that in 30 to 60 days max. So we can turn these big tanks in every 60 days. We always have a guessing game. This is probably not the day to do it, but we always try to get people to guess how many bottles in that. Yeah, nobody ever gets close. A lot. Well, that's a good close. To give you an idea, 28,000 bottles is in every one of these tanks. And we'll turn those tanks every 2 to 3 months max. These tanks here, these three here are what we fill from. We'll work our stuff, go through a process back there. This is what they use on the bottling line. But these are 11,000 bottles each. This is a typical run. And one of these tanks here is 945 cases approximately. That's what just one of these smaller. Of course, that's 2.5 times that. But we go through the winemaking. There's two parts of winemaking. There's chemistry class, and then there's art. So we have a lot of doctors or dentists and things that get into this business, and they feel you can go from a script. Well, you can do a certain amount of it with a script, but you still got to have the art form to it. So there's a little technique you've got to learn and things like that. Me and my son both have normal palates, I would say. You know, a lot of people, when you do this, they have eccentric palates, and they like what a small group of people like. One of the best things you can do in wine business is make a wine that a lot of people like. If your intent is to sell wine, that's what you need to do. You don't need a very, I'm really not a big fan of this tastes of leather or dirt or this. I have no use tasting any leather. Yeah. If you've had leather, it's like, no, I don't really like that. So, but that's what, we started out, and we're self-taught, reading books. That's how I learned how to do this, just read a lot of books. And then I've taught my son, and then he does almost all the winemaking now, and I do most of the paperwork and marketing. I'm out on the road back in force, so, but that's kind of what we do. But ferments, we let it settle. Everybody's had orange juice with all the sediment in the bottle. So we let that settle to the bottle, and then it's called racket in our business, which I don't know where they get that from, but you pump it off the top, you leave the solids at the bottom. You do that 2 or 3 times, and then it becomes fairly clear. And then we have a filter machine. We have 2 separate filter machines, but one of them's a cross-flow filter, and essentially it blows the juice across it with limited pressure, and it will take that wine down to 0.20 microns. That's almost hospital sterile, to give you an idea. That's how clean that wine is when it comes out. That's our final press. When it goes through there, it'll come in here to these tanks. If it needs sweetening, we've got a large tank there. It's a 1,000-gallon tank. We used to put all the sugar, like everybody's had blackberries. They're not as sweet, so you have to supplement a little sugar. You actually just use table sugar is all you do. You know, to give you an idea, that tank there with blackberry juice in it takes 5,000 pounds of sugar. Now, the yeast will eat that sugar to zero. There will be no sugar left when that's done. And that's what we're after, 0 sugar. When it comes over here, if it's a sweet wine, which we specialize in, and 98% of our sales are, we will supplement sugar to taste. And this is the art form. So you can get stuff, you can test it, you can get pretty close to it. You know, and give you an idea, like people with diabetic, glucose meter. You can get close, but there's always that little, the fruit's never the same. The acids are never the same. So you can't take that, you can take that basic information, but you just can't say it applies. It will not apply because fruit's different every time, your pHs are different, your maturity of your group's different, and that's when the art form. And we actually will, I'll taste it, my son will taste it, it never goes out unless we both taste it. Staff will taste it, we'll all take it to all of them so they all get into it. Hey, what do you think of this? And some of them will say, oh, it needs a little more of this or a little more of that. We can adjust a few of the things. One of the first things I learned in winemaking was we pressed a Chardonnay, you press them as soon as you harvest, but you take that grape and you press it and there's still a lot of juice in it. So we can't do this as a commercial winery, but I took that, the remains, I adjusted the acids, I adjusted a bunch of the tannins in it and things of that nature, and I made a wine that people liked that we gave away at the time. But people enjoyed it, but that told me what I could do, just like you do when you're cooking. Little salt, little pepper, little whatever you do, that's the same thing we do. So you're adjusting stuff. So when we get through there, it takes quite a bit of time for it to settle out. Goes through the filter machine, we pump it over here, we'll supplement it with sugar as needed. Then it comes over to the bottling line. We've got food grade pumps, there's one right here behind us. And that fluid will be pumped in here. It's got a reservoir. We'll get into the bottling in just a few minutes, but this thing does 3,000 bottles an hour. We run it at least 3 days a week, sometimes more. Christmas time for us is just like the mall. It's our big sales time, so the last quarter. So we're just getting on the edge of it. But these guys, we've got a small crew. We've got 25 employees currently. We run with 6 up here. We produce all the wine up here with 6 people. We've got a warehouse in Louisville. We distribute to the northern part of the state with. We've got the warehouse here, which we run out of here. Both of those are in my oldest daughter's name. She lives in Bowling Green. We cannot hold both licenses, but she can hold one of them. And so we do the work, but the license is under her name. And sometimes she sees the paperwork. Not very often. Yeah, I do most of the paperwork. And then we also have a new warehouse in St. Louis. So we have distribution there under her name. Her name is Purple Moose Distributing. If you see it out on the vans, you'll see our vans. We've got the big logo vans everywhere. But quick story, when she's first grade, the next child come to her shoulder, so her nickname's been Moose ever since. And so every Christmas she gets a moose of some kind from me for her Christmas. So that's our little thing we do. When we get here, we're going to show you this in just a minute, but we put the bottles here, we blow nitrogen in them. Nitrogen is heavier than air. Air's our enemy. One of the worst things on wine is air. So everything you try to do is keep the air out. It'll go through the first nozzle here, it'll blow nitrogen in, displaces the oxygen out of the bottle. Then it goes through the merry-go-round, it fills it. It goes to the next arm, it levels it, so feds like it not too full, not too empty. So it's got to be right on the dot to make them happy. Then you go to the Next part, it blows nitrogen again above the wine, and then it puts a cork in. Our cork is a synthetic cork. We used to use real corks. Real corks have they have a lot of fissures, a lot of cracks. There's a shortage of them. They've gotten very expensive. To give you an idea, we go through this. People always love it. If you got 3 corks, you got a real natural cork, you got an artificial cork, and you got a screw top. What's the best closure? Screw top. No comparison. People don't like it, but it keeps the air off. Now, we use synthetic corks made from sugar cane. There's 0 carbon footprint, and they look like a real cork, but they don't allow the air in. One of the big things on them is on a real cork, if you pour a corkscrew in and you don't put it deep enough, it's going to crack or they'll crumble. With the synthetic, you can put it a third in and you can pull that out, and it will not allow the air in before, and they'll last for years and years.
You know how long I had it, and then I tried to take the cork out, and
Yeah, you'll have trouble with real corks. The other issue is too, we make a lot of sweet wines. Well, what do you do with sweet wines? You refrigerate them. Well, you take a real cork, which is real wood. They strip a tree about every 8 to 9 years is what it takes to redo the cork, and that cork becomes brittle, and then it will crumble, and then it will allow air in. So that's kind of what you're going through. But say after the cork, it goes around our machine. Over here, usually today we won't be running labels. We've got these new pre-printed bottles, but it'll run through, put the capsule on. This is strictly decorative. There's nothing on this that's helpful for air or anything of that nature. It's decorative, and then it comes out. And usually we're checking labels. You got a person here, and they'll spin them, and they're checking, make sure the label's not wrinkled and things. The hardest part of any process, I don't care if it's canning, green beans, corn, whatever your factory is, the labeling machine. That's the biggest slowdown. And it doesn't matter who you ask, it's always the labelers are the issue. So, but it'll come through. They'll kick it out. We date stamp them, all of our stuff, food requirements. We have them date stamped so we could always withdraw them. One of the best part about wines is the health department in general doesn't check you because wine does not transmit pathogens. The alcohol does not allow pathogens in wine. So unlike milk and food, other type of food products, essentially ours, it can turn to vinegar, but that's all you're going to get. Yeah, then you can wash your windows with it or whatever. Yeah, everybody puts vinegar in their wash now. So, but that's why it's so good. This is an idea of our corks, and but it's sugar cane. So that's a big deal for us. That's most of it. Does anybody have any questions?
No. Does the sugar from the corks ever leach into the wine?
No. It's just yeah. No, they do really well. I love these things. Oh, I'm sorry. You were asking about sugar out of the cork. Yeah, it's just there's no sugar in it. It's actually the pulp.
Okay.
Is what they're using out of the sugar cane. So, yeah, that's what we do. And the other part is the cost savings, but that's not the most important thing for us. Corks right now are getting so scarce. Used to, we'd spend, this years ago when we were smaller, $45,000, $50,000 in corks, and we could buy these for around $23,000. Now we're buying about 200 and some thousand of corks, and we'd be buying $500,000 of real corks. Yes, ma'am.
what determines whether you use a cork or the screw on?
What determines whether we use a cork or a screw on? In general, most people do not like screw top yet. They just do not like it. So that's really, this machine actually has an attachment where we could put screw tops. We've done a little. It's a slower process. The capsules are harder to feed because they're tin, and they just don't feed as well, and we have more stoppage. So it really slows the process down. We do make some because, in general, there's a lot of people who doesn't like to pull the cork or it's too hard for them. and they want the screw top. And the other thing we do it is for restaurants. Some of them make sangrias and things, and they can reseal it, so there's less spoilage. So that's kind of how that works. So, yes, ma'am.
What about your other, like when you had your blackberry, do y'all grow those or?
We used to grow all of our fruit originally, but we are eating through about 250 acres of fruit now. We can't grow enough of it or get the staff.
You got mango and everything.
Yes. So we buy from big growers. That's what we do now. We buy almost all of our fruit comes from big growers. The other day I got in just under $400,000 worth of blackberries. So that's kind of what we do, you know, and that'll last us three months or so, and then we'll get another batch in, and it just continues. You keep rolling through, and like we get fruit all over the country. We get our apple from Washington State. We get our Concord from New York. We get cranberries from Wisconsin. So we pretty much go where they grow the best fruit. We in general do two things. We try to get, you can make bad wine out of good fruit. You can make good wine out of good fruit. So, but we try to buy really good fruit. You've got to start with good fruit. Very expensive. We usually spend $2 to $3 million a year in fruit. That's just our fruit. So it's very expensive. But we buy good fruit. We can mess it up, but we try not to. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, I wonder, in terms of cost, is it more expensive to use the screw top or the cork? I mean, in terms of your company costs.
Right. The cost between screw top and cork, in general, they're almost the same. It's almost identical. The machinery just won't run it as fast. That's the main issue, and that's what we hear. Another big winery up in Indiana does 5 times what we do. They're huge. They used to do screw top and they quit because they had so much issues with the screw top, just getting it to work properly. So, and I mean, they had, you know, it's probably a $5 million machine, and it was just, this one 4 years ago was $225,000. Right now for this same machine is about $450,000. To give you an idea, that's the difference in stuff. We would get a truckload of bottles in. They used to be $24,000, $25,000 for a semi. We get one every week and a half. Now they're $32,000 with the COVID issue. So the cost has really jumped on this stuff. So, any more questions? Yes.
Do your bottles age well? In other words, should you drink one of your bottles soon or allow it to age?
Sure. She was asking if the wine ages well or not. Okay, we've got 2 different ones. We got the sweet wines. The sweet wines are best consumed early. You get the best fruit. It's no different. If you pick your fruit and you eat it, you want it fresh as you can get it. Now we have dry wines. I have the Dossie Reserve, which is my last name. It's a Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, Merlot, Petit Syrah blend. We actually got those grapes of Sonoma. Those you want to age. Ours right now is 2017. We're trying to get another 22 ton right now, but with all the heat and stuff they have, we're having trouble getting fruit. There's a shortage of fruit right now. That's the hardest part. A few years ago, everybody remembers when the big retail, McDonald's and these guys came out with all these fruit drinks. Fruit prices went up 40% because they were taking the excess fruit off. It takes you 3 to 5 years for you to recycle through, and people do more plantings to supply and demand. So it just pumps the price up. Ready, bud? We're going to run our machine now.
Thank everyone for tuning in. I know you had a good time at the Purple Toad Winery. This is Master Gardening, and until next time, good gardening.